Okay. Onward to something even harder. Where's my camera? Oh, Discord has my camera. Bye, Discord. Damn it. Going to have to try this again. Am I back? The camera's working. Yay. And we're back. Okay. So we got ourselves up into our circular orbit next to where we want to put our little satellite here. And let's show off the satellite real quick. So this is the same satellite we were looking at last time. Just to remind folks, cute little guy. And time to fix our inclination. I do not like trying to plan out a control operation like a thrust in order to manipulate a derived quantity like the ascending node longitude. Because the closer you are to a zero inclination orbit, the more it skitters around. But there's a way around this. It is possible to treat this differently by considering the problem from a different projection. Think for a moment about the plane of the target orbit. Okay, just put that in your head and think of that as being the horizontal plane. Now, what orbit are we in relative to that? Well, we're in a elliptical orbit which bobs up and down through it. Well, let's ignore our laterals for now. Let's just look at the distance above and below that plane. So drop a perpendicular from whatever our position is down to the plane or up to the plane. Well, we're going up and we're going down and we're going up and we're going down. Almost harmonic motion, possibly harmonic motion, I don't know, for an extended orbit, one with high eccentricity. It won't be harmonic, obviously, because we may go up a little bit and down a long way and up a little bit. But the fact is that at that instant of where we're crossing it, we can linearize the problem. We consider what's our speed at the instant where we cross it. And well, if we're a ways back from that, maybe we can turn on our engines and essentially do a soft landing on the plane. So just basically burn to slow our descent onto the orbital plane. And when we get there, if we can get our velocity zero at altitude zero over that plane, then we will be moving in that orbital plane. Okay, so that fixes our inclination, and it fixes our argument of periapsis. Actually, no, it doesn't. It fixes our longitude of the ascending node and the plane. And as long as our burn doesn't change our angular momentum, okay, so we can't burn prograde, we can't burn retrograde, we don't want to burn radially in or out because those will also change our apoapsis and periapsis. So as long as we only burn perpendicular to our own orbit, we should end up in the correct plane with plus or minus errors about the same periapsis and apoapsis we had before, which should leave us in a circular orbit in the correct plane with the correct apoapsis and an incorrect periapsis. And at that point, then we need to just sneak our periapsis in and tweak it, and we're done. And we may, in fact, be done earlier. What I've noticed when I'm testing this is that once I get my circular orbit set up and I correct my inclination, the contract is going away. The contract is being satisfied. So it could just be that this contract, the orbit is so close to circular that they're demanding that our initial approximately circular orbit is good enough to satisfy the contract. So what does the code look like? Well, It all comes down to the angular momentum vectors. So here is the new way I'm computing things. I'm saying local p underscore s is, and this is just an expression, so we can compute our ship position on demand. So these aren't computing the ship position, saying to compute the ship position, do this. And let's open out all of these. I will close them as we discuss them. Okay. So the first thing is we want to get the normal vector for the target orbit and the normal vector for our orbit and compare them. If they're close enough, we're done. So the normal vector is our velocity vector cross product with our position vector. So we need our position. So here's how to get position. Here's how to get our velocity. And then HS is going to be our direction of our perpendicular. So we take the velocity and the position. So here's the expression. The cross product of the velocity and the position vectors normalized. And to get those, we trigger the calls. I could put those in line, keeping them separate for now just so I can read it. This means that this file is going to get very large, but it's going to be a whole bunch of small things. So as we understand these, we can collapse them. So we know how to get our position. So PS is how to get position, VS is how to get velocity, and HS will come out to our angular momentum vector normalized. And I think I do that because later on I will want to dot product it to find a component of something in that direction. So this isn't the angular momentum, this is the direction of angular momentum. Let's fix comments as we go. Oh, we do not. Okay. There's all sorts of annotations you can put in VS Code, and I am trying not to trigger them too much. So now we need the same vector, the angular momentum direction of angular momentum vector in the target orbit. Well, its position, it's only used here, so we're going to put it in line. So when we want to compute this, we get the position vector, which is the position on orbit, and this is actually a position relative to the ship raw coordinates frame. So I have to subtract out the position of the body in that same coordinate frame in order to get the position vector from the center of the body to the point on the orbit. So here's PT, VT. Fortunately, the velocity is correct, so we just grab the orbital velocity, take the cross product, normalize it, and now we've got the direction, our angular momentum direction, and now we have our target orbit angular momentum direction. Close it. IR is our relative inclination. Sorry about the short names, but I'm having to use these all over the place, and I don't want to go full Java on this. To get that, we compute our ship direction, ship angular momentum direction, and our orbit angular momentum direction, and we use VANG to say what's the angle between them in degrees. All done. Boop. So now we check our termination condition. We're mainly setting these up. The goal is to be able to lock the throttle and the steering to something, so every time KSP comes around to say what is the throttle set to, it can set it correctly. Let me make sure I'm going to see anything that happens here. So let's see. Termination condition, we start off with compute our relative inclination. This is separate. Like I said, I want KSP to be able to use those functions while it's setting up the throttle and the steering. I also need it, which is why I had to break all these out separately. I have to do a separate lambda for each one of these because they'll be used in more than one place. So termination condition is we get our relative inclination, and we compare it to the maximum, and if it's small enough, we're done. We lock throttle to 0, we lock steering to prograde. This will cause KSP to no longer be calling all the little delegates we're creating. Yay! The delegates will still exist. Boo! But that's okay. I'm not sure what kind of garbage collection C# does under the hood here. I hope it's really good, because every 5 seconds we're creating a whole new set of delegates. Okay, so that's our termination condition. We can fold that. So, what do we need now? Well, pdist is that perpendicular distance from where we are down to the target orbital plane, to the flat. And that we get by taking ps, which is the position of the ship, and we dot product it with our angular momentum vector, angular momentum direction vector of the target. So we've got our position here, and we've got the perpendicular vector here, and the dot product will basically give us just the component in that direction. Yay! Because HT is already normalized. So that's pdist. P-rate is the exact same thing, but we apply it to our velocity vector. So now we get our velocity, only the component in the direction of that perpendicular of the target orbit. So we know a position along the line, and we know a velocity along the line. So now we do a little math. The question is, what is the acceleration that we would apply that would cause the position and the velocity we have now to both go to 0 at the same time? So I want to solve for the acceleration, and I want to solve for the time. And I'm interested in solutions where that time is in the future. I'm also wanting to pay attention to the ones where the acceleration is significant. So v equals at and x equals at squared divided by 2, a little bit of basic algebra. We eliminate a from the x equation, and we get x in terms of v and t, and we can solve for t, which is 2x over v. We have x and v, so there's t. So let's put that back in for a, and now we can get a. So there's our algebra, and now we implement it. So the burn time for our hypothetical maneuver would be the distance, 2 times the distance divided by the rate, 2x over v. So now we have b time, which is negative if the 0 is in front of us and positive if the 0 is behind us. Okay, so if time 0 is when we cross the plane, then we're at time minus something. If we're at time plus something, then we're going away from it, and we can wait for later. We'll see that logic later. So now we want to compute the acceleration, and we're on for it. So we're going to do all in one function. We're going to roll this all the way forward to calculating a desired throttle setting. So the time we calculate, the acceleration is v over t. So we call, I'm going to put in local p rate is underscore p rate. Let's make our delegate calls be on separate lines so we can document what they are. P rate is how fast we are approaching. So it'd be acceleration. Elsewhere where I have controllers, the acceleration will be some gain times the change in velocity. In this case, I have to use acceleration as the velocity to zero out divided by the time it's going to take to zero it out. So that's a forced quantity. Well, to get this acceleration, we multiply by the ship mass, and that gets us the force that we need. Force is just thrust. This will be in kilonewtons, because acceleration is in meters per second, and the ship's mass is in thousands of kilograms, or tons. So given the force, well, what's our maximum force we can do? So our force divided by our maximum force will give us how much throttle, 0 to 1. Maximum force is the available thrust, and we don't want to crash the program when we stage, because we will probably be staging during this period. So we say max force is available thrust, but if it's less than 0.01, we'll use 0.01. This means that pretend we always can do a little teeny bit of force. This means that during staging, we're going to cram the throttle all the way up to maximum, which is cool because that means when the new engines come online, they will light at maximum, which will make up for any delta V that we haven't gotten while we're away, and we may lower the throttle very rapidly after that. So there's our throttle command, and this is going to be, well, this could be anything. We haven't sanitized any of this stuff, so time could be positive or negative. We hope it's negative for a maneuver. It might be positive if we're going the wrong way. Our acceleration could be positive or negative depending on whether we're up above or we're above coming down or below going up. So there's all sorts of factors in here that we're going to want to look at later, but B throt will be 0 to 1, or maybe it's 0 to -1, or maybe it's bigger than 1 if we've got too much thrust, or less than -1. So a negative throttle setting is just a positive setting in the other direction. So we're going to have B throt available for use elsewhere, but when we start computing our actual throttle that we want to set, it's going to be the absolute value of the throttle. Oops, I'm calling it twice. I don't want to do that here. I'm going to be calling it a bunch of extra times. I don't need to add a spurious doubling here. So take our throttle, take its absolute value, and then no greater than 1. So raw CT is going to be from 0 to 1. The throttle, the amount of throttle we would need to do what we're going to do. And that's raw CT. The next thing we're going to do is we now have enough information that we can say, is it time to drop out of time warp? And there's a whole bunch of complicated logic there. I think I'm going to ask you to trust me on that one. The idea is as we're getting closer and closer to time to do the maneuver, we want to reduce the amount of time warp and eventually go to 0. So the next thing we work on is how about steering? Well, we look at our angular momentum of the ship. Yep, there we go. Because we want to thrust along the direction of our angular momentum vector so that we don't change our periapsis or our apoapsis or any of that. We look at B throt, so we get the raw throttle setting. Remember, B throt was going to be positive or negative appropriately. Then we set next CS to HS times the sign, SGN, signum function. So I added a signum function to the library. So if B throt is positive, then I want next CS to be in the same direction as HS. And if it's negative, I want it in the other direction. So this handles, remember when we took the absolute value of our throttle here? Well, if B throt is negative, we are going to steer in the opposite direction. So we're either steering up or down. And to keep us from radically rolling all over the place for random reasons, I'm going to take this next CS, which is a vector, and I'm going to do a look-dir up to get a orientation, which is a vector with a roll on it. And I want to orient it so that the facing top vector is as stable as possible. So I want a orientation along the next CS vector whose top vector coming out matches our existing top vector. So again, just to eliminate the rolling. And that's steering. That's actually the function that we will hand off to KSP to do steering. So now we say, what is our next actual throttle? We've got a raw throttle coming in, which could be really tiny or really huge. Well, if previously we're going to track how much throttle we used the last iteration through. We said, well, if the last time I committed a throttle, it was 0, then I don't want to start committing a new throttle until I use 60%. So if we're really far, if we're halfway around, if we're a quarter of the way around the orbit from where we should be thrusting, don't inch the throttle up slowly, because that will then take forever, because we'll be continually adjusting our orbit and our crossover point will get farther and farther. So we're going to wait until we need 60% of our throttle. It's kind of like doing a hover slam. We're going to wait until we have 60% of our throttle is needed. If we're not there yet, return 0. Otherwise, we're going to return this raw value. So the next CT is going to be the next throttle we use. Our throttle function says grab next CT. Separately from the hysteresis setting, if we're faced wrong, turn down the throttle. And max facing error for this maneuver is, let's see here, what is max facing error? It comes from this configurable thing. If we're 15 degrees off of where we're supposed to be pointed, don't burn. And we're going to remember this as the match throttle previous value that we used in the previous one. And this is actually underscore throttle is going to be what we actually use to set the throttle. Now I could have match throttle prev set above here, but what I want to do is if we go off center and we kill the throttle and we come back on center, I'm going to look again. I'm going to start over from 0. If we don't need 60% throttle, we're going to wait some more. So that's throttle. This is a lot of code to look at. So now, this next block is just a periodic printing thing, which means every 5 seconds or so, and if I'm in time warp, I take that into account, I'm going to print out some interesting values to the console. And that's all for debugging, and I should have removed it. Get down to the bottom, and there we lock our throttle and our steering. So the moment we do this, KSP will start calling these throttle and steering delegates, which will perform all of the computations to get there. Now, up until now, we've just been, saying, well, here's the delegate that performs it, and here's the new delegate that takes the old delegates and performs the new thing. So there's our logic. Does it work? Well, I assert that it works, but assertion is not proof. Now let's turn off the code editor and let's go fly this sucker. Sometimes it takes KSP a while to get things going. I am not going to bring up the console because the debug messages are no longer necessary. What's going to be important is just noticing its behavior. Early on, we have seen this part of the flight over and over and over again. I probably should have set up a save that started on our transit out to the orbit. But this gives us a chance to think about what's going to happen. So we're going to get up to a parking orbit at, what did I say, 72, somewhere between 72 and 80 kilometers. I forgot what I've got it set to these days. I think I've got it set to 80. We'll get up to that orbit, we'll circularize, and then we'll push our apoapsis out to the target orbit, and we'll go out there and we'll circularize. And then we'll coast around until we come to an ascending node or a descending node, and we'll correct our inclination. So you'll notice that KSP is showing us ascending nodes and descending nodes on our target orbit. This is the nodes for the target orbit relative to the ecliptic, actually to the equatorial plane for Kerbin. Okay, so Kerbin's north pole is straight up there, and mostly we're in the equatorial plane. I believe the MUN has 0 inclination. Actually says the MUN. I was going to just call it MUN from now on, but oh well, if they call it the MUN, I'll call it the MUN. So our target orbit has a inclination of about 1 degree, so not very inclined. We are going to launch, and while our ascent profile gives us almost 0 inclination, it's almost 0. I think my test run, it was like 0.1 degrees. But the important thing is that the ascending node and descending node of this relative to the equatorial orbit are not going to be the ascending node and descending node that I'm interested in. They'll be close to it. But that means that I won't be waiting until we're exactly next to this DN or this AN mark before we do anything. It will pick the proper place based on my orbit's inclination and where those two planes cross. Okay, so we are, where are we? We are in coast phase. So we're coasting up to our 80-kilometer apoapsis. Now, if I went into time warp, it would come right back out because our time to apoapsis is, just over 30 seconds. We can wait that long. Top-down views of this are really kind of cute. Staging. We are now on our final engine, so we won't actually be staging on our ascent orbit or on our inclination change orbit. I'll leave the logic in because who knows what will happen in the future. And there we're inflating our current orbit to get back out to our target, which is this green spinny thing going around. Now, there's nothing in KOS that actually has this target. I wish I could actually target this orbit somehow. I could right-click on it to pin the notifier, but I can't actually target it, so there's nothing internally. I actually had to take the contract parameters and type them into the script for this vessel. But you see there, we have locked down our apoapsis at 4557075 meters, and the correct one is 4557075 meters. So we are, well, when both are rounded to 1, we're close. In fact, we just popped over to 76, 77. So as we're coasting, KSP is adjusting the numbers on us. So at this point, we have a long coast ahead of us. This is, in fact, 2 hours and 17 minutes, and I am not going to sit here and wait 2 hours and 17 minutes. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a time warp. Now, the coast code notices a time warp in it, and automatically does a warp to get us out there nice and close to our target. So we have warped up, and we are still in the coast phase. And our apoapsis is in 45 seconds. So we're doing a coast, and we're doing a circularization. And those two steps are the same coast and circularization steps that we used getting into orbit 80 kilometers. So reusing code. Yay! Libraries are good. So we're not just reusing the code from mission to mission, we're using the circularization code several times in this mission, and the ascent code. Well, the coast code. So there we have expanded ourselves, and you can see that if we are careful about our burn, if we knew what the argument of periapsis was for our target, we could probably automate the process of making the apoapsis and periapsis line up. But we don't, so these are arbitrary. In fact, if I had waited half a day, these would be reversed. So at this point, we are in the phase of the flight where we are correcting our inclination. And it's going to wait for us to correct our inclination here. We may actually be still fiddling around with the orbit. I doubt it. I didn't see the notification come up, so let's bring up the console. And we are, in fact, in our phase match Incl running. So it's dumping out our stuff every 5 seconds. Turn that off. So we have a ways to go before we're ready. I mean, this descending node out here is 30 minutes ahead of us. So I'm going to turn on a time warp. And our code that does the correction watches the time warp, and it will step us down. So as we step down to time warp at 50x, it will step us down to 10x and 1x and so on as we get closer to the descending node there. And remember, it's actually that's the descending node of that orbit relative to the equator. It's actually near that somewhere in this range is our ascending node relative to that. Well, it's ascending node relative to me. Not sure why it says DN. Oh, I was wrong. This is the descending node, my orbit through that orbit. Oh, sweet. Okay, so this is actually my relative inclination. That's better. I like that better. I'm glad they did it that way. And I didn't notice that until I was actually looking at it. So we could have clicked on our orbit and said warp to this location. But notice we're down to 10x, 5x, it's too bad there's no ETA because it's not actually a point on our orbit. And down to 1x, so we are preparing to actually burn. And I'm going to look at this side on. So we should see our blue orbit swing around to match the green orbit. I said that with such confidence. So I think we're past the node. And I didn't see a steer. What direction are we pointing? We should be pointing either up or down at this point. Ah, there. I got there just in time. We had a really, really, really brief burst. And notice the contract orbit went away. So when we hit the inclination, the contract orbit was satisfied and we are done. So now this spacecraft has a final phase of its flight plan, which is actually set by the class. That basically just every 10 seconds it says who it is and the fact that it's parked. So, bloop. So quickly Concerned Tramp A01 parked at that orbit, inclined 1.3 degrees. Now, there is the opportunity inside the scripting for us to write additional scripting for the spacecraft that happens before it goes on to that on-station thing. I may want to make that a little subroutine that tricks off. Because more advanced satellites, for instance, if we wanted to do a Kerbal stationary satellite, we would want it to have some station keeping. So anytime we switch to the satellite, it would say, oh, what do I need to do to fix my orbit so that I am continuing to be Kerbal stationary? That's actually a hard one, because not only do you need to correct the period of your orbit, but you need to sneak back into position. And if you let a a spacecraft get too far out of position. That may take some doing. When we get there, we will worry about it. But for this one, all we're doing is just saying over and over again, Tramp A01 is online. So let's go back to the Space Center and do a save. And we're going to leave Tramp A01 sitting out there as a beacon in space. If we go to our tracking station, I'm not sure why it has two lines. Perhaps the tracking station is still showing the contract that we just finished. Oh no, it didn't finish. The contract line went away, but it didn't finish. No. Mission control active. It's not done yet. Build a new unmanned probe. I did this after. It has an antenna and can generate power. It has an antenna and it can generate power. No! Wait, what? I designed that ship after I took this contract. Okay, so we're going to solve this off stream. See you later.